"Your violin goes in the cargo hold, or you don't fly," gate agent Brenda Higgins snapped. To her, the black teenager standing at the first-class podium wasn't a Juilliard-bound prodigy holding a fragile $4 million 1735 Guarneri. He was simply an easy target she could bully to steal his seat for a wealthy friend. Brenda smiled, fully believing she held absolute power at Gate K12. She was dead wrong. The unassuming, grey-haired man quietly watching from 10 feet away wasn't just another delayed passenger. He was Kezia Verity, the CEO of Meridian Airlines, and he had seen every single thing. Chicago O'Hare International Airport was a cathedral of chaos on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. A lingering winter storm system had dumped 3 inches of snow over the Midwest, resulting in a cascading domino effect of delayed flights, missed connections, and frayed nerves. The air inside Concourse K smelled faintly of stale pretzels, damp wool coats, and burnt coffee. Over the incessant drone of the public address system, the low hum of thousands of anxious travelers created a tense, suffocating atmosphere. At Gate K12, the situation was particularly dire. Meridian Airlines Flight 408 to New York's JFK International was heavily overbooked, delayed by 2 hours, and the waiting area was packed shoulder to shoulder. Behind the podium stood Brenda Higgins, a veteran gate agent with 18 years of service and a permanent scowl etched into her features. Brenda was tired, her feet ached, and she had long ago lost any empathy for the traveling public. To her, passengers were not people. They were logistical annoyances standing between her and the end of her shift. Today, Brenda had a specific problem. Flight 408 was overbooked in first class due to an equipment change. A smaller aircraft had been swapped in at the last minute. Furthermore, one of Brenda's personal acquaintances, a wealthy real estate agent named Cynthia Powell, who frequently gifted Brenda expensive cosmetics and gift cards, was flying standby and aggressively demanding a first-class seat. Brenda, who thrived on the petty power her position afforded her, had promised Cynthia she would make it happen. All she needed to do was find someone to bump back to economy, or better yet, bump off the flight entirely. Brenda scrolled through the digital manifest on her screen, her eyes scanning for a vulnerability. She needed a passenger without elite airline status, someone who wouldn't put up a fight, or someone she could easily intimidate. Her cursor stopped on seat 2, A. Washington, M. age, 17. A teenager. A teenager in first class, with no frequent flyer history attached to the profile. Perfect. Brenda smirked, mentally moving Cynthia into 2A. Now she just had to wait for Monsieur Washington to approach the desk. Sitting 20 yards away from the podium, completely unaware of the target painted on his back, was Malik Washington. 17 years old, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor, Malik sat perfectly still amid the airport chaos. He wore a faded grey university hoodie, dark jeans, and clean white sneakers. Resting across his lap, guarded as fiercely as a newborn child, was a sleek, reinforced carbon fiber BAM violin case. Malik was not a child of privilege. He had grown up on the south side of Chicago, raised by a grandmother who worked 2 minimum-wage jobs to keep the heat on. But Malik possessed a once-in-a-generation gift. He was a prodigy, a virtuoso, whose fingers danced across the fingerboard with a technical brilliance and emotional depth that moved hardened instructors to tears. Today was the most important day of his life. He was flying to New York for a final, in-person audition at the Juilliard School. His community, his church, his high school teachers and local business owners had spent months organizing bake sales and crowdfunding campaigns to buy him this ticket. They had specifically pooled enough money for a first-class ticket to ensure he had priority boarding and overhead bin space. Why? because the instrument inside the case wasn't just a violin. It was a 1735 Guarneri del Gesù on a rare, highly conditional loan from a prestigious Chicago arts foundation. It was insured for $4.2 million. The wood was nearly 300 years old, the varnish uniquely sensitive to humidity and temperature. If anything happened to it, Malik's career would be over before it began, and the financial ruin to his backers would be catastrophic. Malik checked his phone. It was almost time to board. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and visualized the first movement of the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto in D major. He was ready. He just needed to get to New York. He stood up, slinging his backpack over one shoulder and gripping the handle of the violin case with his right hand. He walked toward the first-class boarding lane, the red carpet beneath his sneakers feeling like the final steps toward his destiny. From behind the podium, Brenda Higgins watched him approach. She took in his hoodie, his youth, his skin color, and the battered backpack. A sneer touched the corner of her lips. In her mind, she had already written his story. An arrogant kid who probably bought a cheap standby ticket and was trying to sneak onto the priority line. She straightened her posture, practically vibrating with the anticipation of putting him in his place and securing Cynthia's seat. The trap was set. The public address system chimed. Meridian Airlines, Flight 408 to New York. JFK is now ready for boarding. We will begin with our first-class passengers, active duty military, and those needing special assistance. Please have your boarding passes ready. Malik stepped forward. The first-class line was short, consisting mostly of older men in tailored business suits and women with designer luggage. Malik politely filed in, behind a nervous-looking businessman, Thomas Wright, who was furiously typing on a BlackBerry. When it was Malik's turn, he smiled politely at Brenda and placed his digital boarding pass face down on the optical scanner. Beep. Green light. The machine validated his ticket. Seat 2A, cleared for boarding. Malik reached out to retrieve his phone and took a step toward the jet bridge. Hold it right there. Brenda's voice cracked like a whip, loud enough to turn the heads of the passengers waiting in the general boarding area. Malik paused, turning back with a confused but respectful expression. Yes, ma'am? Is there a problem? Brenda slammed her hand down on the scanner, physically blocking it. She looked Malik up and down, her eyes dripping with condescension. This is the line for first class, young man. Group 1. Are you sure you're in the right place? Let me see your boarding pass again. Yes, ma'am. I'm in seat 2A, Malik replied evenly, holding up his phone screen so she could read the large, bold text. Brenda didn't even look at the screen. I need to see your government-issued ID. Now? While ID checks at the gate are rare and usually handled at TSA security, gate agents do have the authority to request them. Malik didn't argue. He carefully set his violin case down, unzipped his backpack, and handed her his Illinois driver's license. Brenda snatched it from his fingers. She scrutinized the card, holding it up to the fluorescent light, then stared hard at Malik, as if trying to uncover a forgery. She tapped aggressively on her keyboard. How did you pay for this ticket? She demanded, her voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. Malik felt a flush of heat rise in his cheeks. People were staring. Thomas Wright, the businessman ahead of him in the jet bridge, paused to look back. A mother behind Malik, Sarah Jenkins, shifted her toddler on her hip and frowned at Brenda's hostile tone. It was purchased with a credit card, ma'am, Malik said quietly, trying to keep the interaction private. My community bought it for me. I'm traveling for a college audition. A community bought it, Brenda repeated loudly, mocking the phrase. Well, I need to see the physical credit card used to purchase the flight to verify against fraud. Standard procedure. This was a blatant lie. Once a ticket is issued and the passenger clears TSA, the gate agent has no business demanding the purchasing credit card unless there is a flagged security alert in the system, which there wasn't. Brenda was improvising, throwing up roadblocks, hoping he would get frustrated and walk away. "I don't have that card," Malik explained, his voice remaining remarkably steady despite the pounding of his heart. "It belongs to the director of my youth orchestra. But I have my boarding pass and my ID. Everything matches." Brenda smiled, a cold, humorless expression. She tossed his ID onto the counter. "Well, since you can't verify the purchase, I cannot allow you to board first class. In fact, we have a VIP passenger who actually needs that seat. I'm going to print you a new boarding pass for seat 34E, back by the lavatories. You can board with Group 5. Malik was stunned. He knew he was being profiled, and he knew it was deeply unfair. But his primary concern was the violin. If he boarded last, the overhead bins would be full. "Ma'am, please," Malik pleaded softly. "I paid for first class specifically so I could board early and ensure there is overhead space for my instrument. It's incredibly fragile." Brenda's eyes darted down to the carbon fiber BAM case. A new, malicious idea sparked in her mind. This was her out. "That item," Brenda said, pointing a manicured finger at the violin case, "is oversized. It exceeds our carry-on dimensions." "It's a standard violin case," Malik countered, a note of desperation finally creeping into his voice. "It fits perfectly in the overhead bin. I fly with it all the time." "Not on my flight, you don't," Brenda snapped, pulling a neon green gate check tag from a dispenser. "The flight is full. Bin space is at a premium. This bag is going under the plane into the cargo hold." Malik felt the blood drain from his face. No, you don't understand. You can't put this in the cargo hold. The temperature drops below freezing at cruising altitude. This is a 1735 Guarneri. The wood will contract and shatter. The varnish will crack. It will destroy a piece of history. Please, I'll hold it on my lap. I'll put it under the seat in front of me." "It doesn't go under the seat, and you aren't holding it," Brenda retorted, peeling the adhesive backing off the green tag and reaching across the podium to slap it onto the case. Malik instinctively stepped back, pulling the violin out of her reach. It was a defensive, protective maneuver, but to Brenda, it was the excuse she needed. "Did you just pull away from an airline official?" Brenda raised her voice dramatically, playing to the crowd. "Are you refusing to comply with safety regulations?" "I am trying to protect a priceless instrument," Malik said, his voice trembling slightly, though he stood his ground. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Ma'am, under the FAA Modernization and Reform Act of 2012, Section 403, U.S. airlines are required by law to allow passengers to carry small musical instruments, such as a violin, into the cabin as long as there is space in the overhead bins at the time of boarding. Since I am in Group 1, there is space." A low murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Sarah Jenkins, the mother in line, nodded approvingly. "The kid is right," she said quietly. "Just let him on." Brenda's face turned an ugly shade of magenta. Being challenged was one thing. Being proven wrong, publicly, by a teenager citing federal law in front of 100 passengers was an unforgivable injury to her ego. She didn't care about Cynthia Powell anymore. She didn't care about the overbooked flight. Now, it was about punishing Malik Washington. "I don't care what piece of paper you printed off the internet," Brenda hissed, her eyes narrowing into slits. "I am the gate agent. My word is final. You are being disruptive. You are being aggressive. And you are refusing a direct order. You are not getting on this plane." The terminal grew eerily quiet, the kind of silence that precedes a car crash. The passengers waiting to board froze, their eyes darting between the irate gate agent and the stunned teenager. "Aggressive?" Malik repeated, holding his hands up, palms open, the violin strapped securely over his shoulder. "Ma'am, I haven't raised my voice. I haven't made any threats. I'm just trying to board the flight I paid for and protect my instrument." Brenda ignored him. She picked up the heavy black telephone receiver on her console and punched in a 3-digit code. "Security?" "Yes, this is gate K12. I need officers immediately. I have a belligerent passenger. He is refusing to comply with baggage regulations. He is acting erratically, and he is creating a threatening environment for my other passengers." "Yes. Hurry." She slammed the phone down and crossed her arms, a look of triumphant vindication on her face. "You're done," she whispered to Malik, so quietly only he could hear. "You're not flying Meridian today. You're probably not flying any airline today." Malik felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. The stakes had just multiplied exponentially. This was no longer just about a missed flight or a ruined audition. For a young black man in America, an encounter with airport police over a fabricated accusation of aggression could end in disaster. It could mean an arrest record. It could mean physical violence. The crushing weight of systemic injustice pressed down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He tightened his grip on the violin case, his knuckles turning white. He thought of his grandmother, working until her hands bled, praying for him. He couldn't let it end like this. But as Malik stood frozen in the spotlight of Brenda's cruelty, he failed to notice the quiet movement in the priority seating area just across the aisle. Sitting in a worn leather armchair, partially obscured by a structural pillar, was a man who had been watching the entire interaction from the moment Malik handed over his ID. He appeared completely unremarkable, in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair neatly trimmed, wearing a tailored, understated charcoal trench coat over a simple navy sweater and slacks. There were no logos on his clothes, no expensive watch flashing on his wrist. To anyone passing by, he looked like a weary college professor or a mid-level accountant heading home for the holidays. His name was Kezia Verity, and he was none of those things. Kezia Verity was the president and chief executive officer of Meridian Airlines. He had not inherited the position. Kezia had started his career 35 years ago on the tarmac of this very airport, throwing luggage in the freezing sleet as a baggage handler. He had worked his way up through scheduling, customer relations, corporate strategy, and finally the C-suite. Despite leading a Fortune 500 company, Kezia despised the ivory tower. 4 times a year, he flew completely undercover, buying economy and standard first-class tickets under his middle name, dressed casually, to observe exactly how his airline operated when management wasn't looking. He wanted to see the cracks in the foundation. He wanted to know how his employees treated people when they thought they held all the power. For the last 10 minutes, Kezia had been witnessing an absolute masterclass in everything he hated. He had watched Brenda Higgins profile the teenager. He had heard her lie about the credit card policy. He had winced when she attempted to extort the young man's priceless violin into the cargo hold, a move that would have resulted in a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Meridian Airlines. And he had felt a surge of cold fury when she blatantly lied to airport police, weaponizing law enforcement against a calm, compliant passenger simply to stroke her own ego. Throughout the exchange, Kezia had remained seated, his face an emotionless mask. Resting on his lap was a slim, encrypted tablet connected to the airline's secure mainframe. While Brenda was arguing with Malik, Kezia had been busy. He had pulled up the flight manifest. He saw Malik Washington in 2A. He saw Cynthia Powell, a non-revenue standby passenger, mysteriously flagged in the system by Agent Higgins for a potential upgrade to 2A, completely bypassing the established upgrade hierarchy. He had pulled up Brenda Higgins's employee file, noting a history of customer complaints regarding rudeness, though none severe enough to terminate a unionized employee. Until today. Kezia tapped the screen, pulling up the FAA regulations regarding musical instruments. The kid had been exactly right. Word for word. Down the concourse, the heavy thud of tactical boots echoed over the tile floor. 2 armed airport police officers, Officer Miller, a burly man with a shaved head, and his partner, Officer Davis, jogged toward Gate K-12. Their hands rested instinctively on their utility belts. The crowd parted nervously, creating a wide berth for the police. Brenda stood on her tiptoes, waving them over. "Officers, over here. This is the individual." She pointed a dramatic finger at Malik. Officer Miller approached Malik, his expression stern. "All right, son. We've got a report of a disturbance. Step away from the boarding area. Keep your hands where I can see them, and let's go have a chat." Malik didn't move. He felt paralyzed. "Officer, I swear to you, I haven't done anything wrong. I just want to board my flight. She's trying to take my violin. Sir, if you don't step out of line right now, we will physically remove you," Officer Davis warned, stepping closer, unhooking the strap on his handcuffs. "Take him away," Brenda sneered loudly. "He's a security risk. I am officially denying him boarding under Meridian Protocol." The mother, Sarah Jenkins, couldn't take it anymore. "This is ridiculous. The boy didn't do anything. She's lying." "Ma'am, step back," Officer Miller ordered, raising a hand toward Sarah. "Let us handle this." He turned back to Malik, his patience gone. "Last warning, kid. Drop the bag and put your hands behind your back." Malik squeezed his eyes shut. A single tear escaped, rolling down his cheek. It was over. The audition, the dream, the years of sacrifice, all destroyed by one cruel woman's whim. "Officers," a calm, authoritative voice echoed through the tense silence. It wasn't loud, but it possessed a resonant, undeniable weight that demanded immediate attention. Everyone turned. Kezia Verity closed his tablet with a soft click. He stood up from the leather armchair, unbuttoning his charcoal trench coat, and began walking slowly toward the podium. His eyes were fixed entirely on Brenda Higgins, and they were as cold as the blizzard raging outside the terminal windows. "The young man will not be putting his hands behind his back," Kezia said, stopping just a few feet from the police officers. "And he most certainly will be boarding this aircraft." Brenda's jaw dropped in sheer outrage. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are? You need to step back before I have you arrested for interfering with airport operations." Kezia didn't even blink. He reached into the breast pocket of his coat, withdrew a matte black security badge adorned with the Meridian Airlines corporate seal, and dropped it onto Brenda's keyboard with a heavy, definitive thud. "I am the one," Kezia said softly, leaning over the podium so Brenda could see the name engraved in gold. "Who signs your paychecks? And as of 60 seconds ago, you no longer work for my airline." The heavy black badge sat on the scuffed surface of the podium, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights of Concourse K. For a few agonizing seconds, the only sound at Gate K-12 was the low hum of the ventilation system. Brenda Higgins stared at the gold lettering. Her brain, sluggish from years of unquestioned authority behind this desk, struggled to process the information. Kezia Verity, President and CEO. She blinked, her vision suddenly blurring as a cold, sickening dread pooled in the pit of her stomach. She slowly dragged her eyes up from the badge to the quiet, grey-haired man standing before her. The arrogant smirk that had been plastered on her face just moments prior dissolved into a mask of pure terror. Officer Miller, standing right next to the podium, leaned over to glance at the ID. The color drained from his face as well. He immediately unhanded his handcuffs, took 2 large steps back from Malik, and cleared his throat nervously. Airport police answered to the port authority, but the CEO of the hub's largest carrier was practically royalty. "Mr. Verity," Officer Miller said, his voice completely stripped of its previous aggressive edge. "Sir, we received a call about a hostile passenger. We were just responding to the gate agent's distress signal. Kezia didn't look at the officers. He kept his gaze locked onto Brenda. You received a distress signal, Officer Miller, from a rogue employee attempting to weaponize your department to cover up a flagrant violation of corporate policy. Mr. Washington is not hostile. He is not a security risk. He is a paying first-class passenger who was simply asserting his federally protected rights. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on a dock. Mr. Verity. Kezia. Sir, please. You don't understand, she stammered, her voice shaking violently. He was refusing to check his bag. The flight is full. We have weight and balance issues. I was just following standard operating procedure. Stop lying, Brenda, Kezia said, his voice dropping an octave, slicing through the air with corporate precision. He placed his tablet next to his badge and tapped the screen, turning it so both she and the police officers could see the data. At exactly 2:04 p.m., you manually accessed the upgrade standby list, Kezia stated, reading from the system logs. You bypassed 3 top-tier frequent flyers to prioritize a non-revenue standby passenger named Cynthia Powell. You moved her into seat 2A, Mr. Washington's seat. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd of passengers. Sarah Jenkins, the mother who had defended Malik, shook her head in utter disgust. Unbelievable, she muttered loudly. She was stealing his seat for a friend. Kezia continued, relentless. You needed an excuse to bump Mr. Washington. So, you profiled him. You demanded his physical credit card, a direct violation of our TSA cleared boarding protocol. When he remained compliant, you attempted to force him to check a priceless 1735 Guarneri violin into a freezing cargo hold, knowing full well it would shatter. You were willing to cost this airline a $4 million negligence lawsuit and destroy a young man's future just to secure a favor for an acquaintance. No, that's not true, Brenda shrieked, panic finally breaking through her paralysis. She reached out, trying to push the tablet away, but Kezia's hand slammed down on the desk, stopping her cold. I have been sitting 20 feet away from you for the last half hour, Ms. Higgins. I watched you do it, Kezia said, his eyes narrowing. I listened to you humiliate this teenager. I listened to you mock the community that pooled their hard-earned money to buy his ticket. And then, when he legally proved you wrong, you called armed police officers and lied to them. You told them he was aggressive. Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? Do you realize what could have happened to him? Malik stood frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. The crushing weight of injustice that had been suffocating him just moments ago was suddenly lifted, replaced by a surreal sense of awe. He looked at the CEO, a man of immense power, standing up for a kid from the South Side. He clutched his violin case tighter, a shaky breath escaping his lips. Before Brenda could formulate another pathetic excuse, the situation escalated into a masterpiece of karmic timing. Pushing her way through the gathered crowd of stunned passengers came Cynthia Powell. She was dragging a Louis Vuitton carry-on, wearing oversized sunglasses indoors and dripping with impatience. She hadn't noticed the police or the deadly silence at the front of the line. "Brenda, honey, finally," Cynthia projected loudly, waving a manicured hand. "Did you secure my first-class seat? I cannot stand out here with the general boarding crowd for another second. Tell me you bumped somebody." The entire gate area turned to stare at Cynthia. The silence was deafening. Brenda closed her eyes, a tear of absolute defeat leaking down her heavily powdered cheek. She wished the floor would open up and swallow her whole. Kezia Verity turned slowly to face the newcomer. He looked her up and down with an expression of mild disgust. "Ms. Powell, I presume?" Cynthia lowered her sunglasses, looking at Kezia with haughty confusion. "And who are you?" "I am the CEO of this airline," Kezia replied smoothly. And I am here to inform you that not only will you not be flying first class today, but your non-revenue buddy pass privileges have just been permanently revoked. You will not be flying Meridian Airlines today, tomorrow, or ever again. I suggest you find another carrier." Cynthia's jaw dropped. She looked at Brenda for help, but Brenda was staring at the floor, sobbing quietly. Humiliated and outmatched, Cynthia spun on her Prada heels and practically sprinted away down the concourse, dragging her expensive luggage behind her. Kezia didn't waste another second on Cynthia. He picked up the heavy black telephone receiver that Brenda had used just minutes prior. He punched in a different code. "David, this is Kezia Verity. Get to gate K12 immediately." Less than 2 minutes later, David Hayes, the Meridian Airlines station manager for O'Hare, came sprinting down the concourse. He was a balding, middle-aged man whose face was flushed crimson with exertion and panic. When a CEO calls a station manager directly to a gate, it is never good news. "Mr. Verity, sir," David gasped, coming to a halt and adjusting his crooked tie. "I didn't know you were in Chicago. What's the situation?" "The situation, David, is that your gate agent here has engaged in gross misconduct, fraud, and the filing of a false police report," Kezia said coldly, not taking his eyes off Brenda. "She is fired, effective immediately, for cause. She will receive no severance, and I want her corporate access revoked before she can log out of that terminal." David swallowed hard, looking at the sobbing Brenda, and then at the furious CEO. "Yes, sir. Immediately, sir." Brenda collapsed into the rolling chair behind the podium, burying her face in her hands. 18 years, she wailed. "You can't do this. I have a pension. I have a mortgage." "You should have thought of your pension before you decided to play God with my passengers," Kezia replied without a shred of sympathy. He turned to Officer Miller and Officer Davis, who had been standing awkwardly by, watching the corporate execution unfold. "Officers," Kezia said, his tone softening slightly, but retaining its authority. "Ms. Higgins is no longer an employee of Meridian Airlines, as she is currently in a restricted, ticketed passenger-only zone without a valid boarding pass or employee credential. She is trespassing. Please escort her out of the secure side of the airport." The poetic justice of the moment hung heavy in the air. The very police officers Brenda had summoned to arrest an innocent black teenager were now tasked with physically removing her. Officer Miller nodded. He stepped behind the podium. "All right, Miss Higgins, let's go. Gather your personal belongings. We're walking out." "Don't touch me," Brenda snapped, grabbing her purse and a cheap winter coat from beneath the desk. She stood up, her face streaked with mascara, glaring venomously at Malik. But Malik didn't look away. He stood tall, the guarneri secured on his shoulder, his expression calm and dignified. He didn't need to say a word. The universe had spoken for him. As Brenda was marched down the concourse by the two police officers, a spontaneous round of applause erupted from the waiting passengers. Sarah Jenkins cheered loudly. Even the tense businessman, Thomas Wright, offered a slow, approving clap. Kezia waited until Brenda was out of sight, before turning his full attention to Malik. The hard corporate CEO vanished, replaced by a warm, deeply apologetic man. "Mr. Washington," Kezia said, stepping forward and extending his hand. Malik shifted his violin case and shook the CAO's hand. "Yes, sir." "I cannot adequately express how sorry I am for what you just endured," Kezia said, his voice thick with genuine remorse. "That woman's behavior does not reflect the values of Meridian Airlines. You were completely in the right. Your composure under that kind of pressure was remarkable." "Thank you, Mr. Verity," Malik said, his voice finally wavering slightly as the adrenaline began to crash. I just need to get to New York. My Juilliard audition is tomorrow morning." Kezia smiled, a genuine warm expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "And you will get there, in seat 2A, and your Guarneri will stay right by your side. Kezia stepped behind the podium, navigating the complex reservation system with the speed of a man who had designed half the software himself. He printed a fresh boarding pass on heavy cardstock. Moreover, Kezia added, handing the pass to Malik, I am refunding the entire cost of your first-class ticket back to the original method of payment. You tell your youth orchestra director that this flight is on me, and I'm assigning a dedicated customer service liaison to meet you at the gate at JFK to ensure you have private transport directly to your hotel. Malik was speechless. He looked at the golden ticket in his hand. I don't know what to say. Thank you. Play well tomorrow, Malik, Kezia said softly. The world needs your music. Kezia then turned to the crowd, raising his voice to address the delayed passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay and the unacceptable scene you just witnessed. As compensation for your patience, every passenger on this flight will receive a $500 travel voucher, credited to your accounts by the time you land in New York. A cheer went up from the crowd, the tension of the last 2 hours completely evaporating. Kezia looked at Sarah Jenkins, the mother who had spoken up for Malik. Mom, he said, gesturing to her and her toddler. I believe seat 2B in first class just opened up. Let's get you and your little one comfortable, shall we? Sarah beamed. Thank you, Mr. Verity. As Malik finally walked down the jet bridge, the heavy red carpet beneath his feet, he felt the vibration of his phone in his pocket. It was a text from his grandmother. Praying for you, baby. Have a safe flight. Malik smiled, looking down at the priceless violin in his hand. You have no idea, Grandma, he thought. You have no idea. Behind him, Kezia Verity closed the boarding door, but the ripples of what happened at gate K-12 were only just beginning to spread. The karma had hit hard, but the real story, Malik's destiny in New York, was about to take center stage. The heavy reinforced door of the aircraft sealed shut with a definitive mechanical clank, shutting out the chaotic noise of Concourse K. Inside the first-class cabin of Meridian Airlines, Flight 408, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the hostility Malik had just survived. It was quiet, smelling of warm mixed nuts and lavender-scented cleaning solutions. Malik sank into the plush leather of seat 2A. His hands were still trembling with the aftershocks of a massive adrenaline dump. He carefully unbuckled the straps of his backpack and placed the carbon fiber BAM case containing the 1,735 Guarneri violin gently into the overhead bin directly above him, shutting it with a satisfying click. It was safe. He was safe. Next to him, in seat 2B, Sarah Jenkins was getting her toddler settled, buckling the seatbelt with a warm, exhausted smile. You handled yourself like a young gentleman back there, Sarah said quietly, leaning across the center armrest. I was terrified for you when those officers showed up. My husband is a defense attorney in Manhattan, and let me tell you, what she did was unconscionable. You stood your ground. Malik offered a weak, grateful smile. Thank you for speaking up for me, Mom. I didn't think anyone was going to. Good people are everywhere, Malik, Sarah replied, adjusting her toddler's blanket. Sometimes they just need a second to find their voice. It looks like the CEO of this airline certainly found his. As the Boeing 737 pushed back from the gate, the lead flight attendant, a kind-eyed woman named Barbara with 30 years of seniority, approached Malik's row. She didn't carry the standard drink cart. Instead, she carried a silver tray holding a crystal glass of sparkling apple cider and a handwritten note on heavy corporate cardstock. Mr. Washington, Barbara said softly, her voice practically dripping with maternal warmth. Mr. Verity personally requested I bring this to you once we crossed 10,000 feet. He also wanted me to assure you that the overhead bin above seat 2A has been locked from the outside. Nobody will touch your instrument for the duration of this flight." Malik took the cider and the note. He broke the wax seal. "Malik, true character is revealed not when we are comfortable, but when we are tested by the unfairness of the world. You passed a test today that no 17-year-old should ever have to take. Play your heart out tomorrow. The skies will always be open to you. Kezia Verity." Malik tucked the note into his breast pocket, leaning his head against the cold acrylic of the window as the plane broke through the heavy Chicago cloud cover, emerging into a brilliant, blinding expanse of blue sky. The physical distance from the ground mirrored his emotional detachment from the trauma of the gate. But down below, the storm he had left behind was rapidly evolving from a localized squall into a Category 5 hurricane. While Malik was 30,000 feet in the air, disconnected from the grid, the digital world was catching fire. Unbeknownst to Brenda Higgins, Kezia Verity, or even Malik himself, a passenger waiting in Group 3 named Gregory Finch, a freelance journalist and avid user of X, formerly Twitter, had pulled out his smartphone the moment Brenda had physically slammed her hand over the boarding pass scanner. Gregory had recorded everything in crisp, 4K resolution. He captured Brenda's sneering face as she demanded the credit card. He captured Malik's polite, terrified citation of the FAA Modernization and Reform Act. He captured Brenda blatantly lying to the armed Port Authority officers, falsely claiming Malik was aggressive and dangerous. And, beautifully, he captured the moment Kezia Verity dropped his CEO badge onto the podium and dismantled Brenda's career with surgical precision. Before Flight 408 even reached the Ohio state line, Gregory had uploaded the 8-minute video to his social media channels with the caption, "Racist gate agent tries to destroy Black Prodigy's violin and have him arrested. Meridian Airlines CEO steps in and delivers absolute nuclear karma. Watch until the end." The internet, fueled by righteous indignation and a collective hatred for airline bureaucracy, exploded. By the time the landing gear of Flight 408 deployed over the Jamaica Bay approach to JFK International Airport, the video had amassed over 4 million views. It was being shared by prominent civil rights attorneys, classical musicians, and major news outlets. The hashtag Meridian Flight 408 was the #1 trending topic worldwide. When Malik stepped off the jet bridge into the bustling terminal of JFK, he was entirely oblivious to his newfound global fame. He retrieved his guarneri, thanked Barbara, the flight attendant, and walked out into the terminal. Waiting for him at the gate, holding a sleek black placard with his name on it, was Arthur Pendleton, Meridian's director of VIP guest relations for the East Coast. "Mr. Washington, a pleasure to meet you," Arthur said, extending a hand. "Mr. Verity briefed me on your situation. We have a black car waiting curbside to take you directly to your hotel in Manhattan. I will be your personal point of contact until you fly back to Chicago." Malik was stunned by the efficiency. Within 10 minutes, he was sitting in the quiet, climate-controlled back seat of a Lincoln Navigator, watching the glowing skyline of New York City rise over the horizon. He pulled out his phone to text his grandmother that he had landed, only to find his device practically melting in his hand. He had 412 unread text messages. His Instagram, which usually had a modest following of fellow high school musicians, was frozen, displaying a +99 notifications badge that refused to load. His phone buzzed in his hand. It was a FaceTime call from Mr. Davies, the director of his youth orchestra in Chicago. Malik answered it. "Malik, thank God you landed." Mr. Davies's face filled the screen, looking breathless and ecstatic. "Are you okay? Is the guarneri safe?" "I'm fine, Mr. Davies." Malik laughed nervously. "The violin is right next to me. The CEO of the airline actually helped me. It was crazy." "Malik, I know," Mr. Davies said, shaking his head in disbelief. "The whole world knows. Turn on CNN when you get to the hotel. You're a viral hero. But more importantly, Malik, people have been finding our orchestra's donation page from the video. In the last 2 hours, we've received over $400,000 in donations. Malik stopped breathing. What? We can buy our own instruments now, Malik. We can fund scholarships. Your grace under pressure just changed our entire community, Mr. Davies said, wiping a tear from his eye. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow is Juilliard. The next morning, the winter sun broke over the Manhattan skyline, casting long, golden shadows across the plush carpeting of Malik Washington's complimentary suite at the Plaza Hotel. It was a world away from the cramped, drafty apartment on the south side of Chicago. Malik sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, staring at the carbon fiber BAM case resting on the glass coffee table. The events of the previous 24 hours felt like a fever dream. The hostility at Gate K-12, the terrifying approach of the armed Port Authority officers, the miraculous intervention by Kezia Verity, and the sudden, explosive, viral fame. It was almost too much for a 17-year-old to process. But as Malik unlatched the case and lifted the 1735 Guarneri del Gesù from its velvet lining, the noise of the outside world faded. The ancient wood, unharmed by the freezing cargo hold it had narrowly escaped, felt warm and familiar against his palm. He drew his bow across the rosin, took a deep breath, and prepared to face the most critical hour of his life. An hour later, Malik stood on the steps of the Juilliard School at Lincoln Center. The air was crisp and electric. He was ushered into a cavernous, acoustically perfect audition hall, lined with dark oak paneling. Behind a long, imposing table sat the admissions committee, a tribunal of the most formidable minds in classical music. Among them were Dr. Harrison Caldwell, a notoriously strict string pedagogue known to stop auditions after merely 8 bars, and Maestro Beatrice Croft, a legendary conductor whose approval could launch an international career. Malik walked to the center of the room. He didn't feel like a scared teenager begging for a seat on an airplane anymore. He felt like a survivor. He had looked systemic cruelty in the eye and stood his ground with quiet dignity. He raised the Guarneri to his chin, locked eyes with Maestro Croft, and began the fiercely demanding first movement of the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto in D major. He didn't just play the notes on the page. Malik poured every ounce of the previous day's terror into the strings. He channeled the suffocating panic of being racially profiled, the soaring, breathless relief of Kezia Verity's intervention, and the overwhelming, tear-inducing love of his Chicago community into a singular, devastating musical interpretation. The Guarneri sang with a rich, dark resonance, weeping through the lyrical passages and roaring through the ferocious cadenzas. It was raw, unadulterated emotion forged into technical perfection. When Malik dragged his bow across the final, thunderous chord, the silence that followed was absolute. For a long moment, nobody breathed. Dr. Caldwell slowly lowered his pen, staring at the young man with wide, unblinking eyes. Maestro Croft simply removed her wire-rimmed glasses and pressed a trembling hand to her chest, wiping away a stray tear. "Mr. Washington," Maestro Croft whispered, her voice carrying effortlessly through the large hall. "That was not an audition. That was an exorcism. Thank you. You may step down." While Malik was securing his future on a stage in New York, the universe was busy delivering the final, crushing blow of karma to Brenda Higgins back in Illinois. Fired from her job of 18 years, stripped of her corporate access, and publicly humiliated, Brenda had retreated to her suburban home, foolishly assuming the worst was over. She was gravely mistaken. The viral video captured by the freelance journalist had not just caught the attention of the public, it had triggered alarms within the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, and the Transportation Security Administration, TSA. At precisely 2 p.m. that Wednesday, 2 black Chevrolet Tahoes pulled into Brenda's driveway. 4 federal investigators from the Department of Homeland Security approached her front door, falsely reporting a security threat at an international airport, especially a fabricated report designed to weaponize armed police officers against a compliant minority passenger, is not a simple HR violation. It is a severe federal offense. Because the high-definition video clearly showed Malik perfectly calm and captured Brenda explicitly lying into the telephone to dispatch emergency services, the government had immediately opened a criminal probe. Brenda was formally placed under investigation for violating Title 18, U.S.C., Section 1001, making false statements to federal law enforcement, and misusing airport emergency response systems. When the federal agents handed Brenda the target letter, the reality of her petty tyranny finally crashed down on her. The loss of her Meridian Airlines pension was suddenly the least of her problems. She was now facing crippling legal fees and the very real threat of federal prison time. The system she had arrogantly tried to use to destroy a teenager's life had violently reversed course and devoured her entirely. Furthermore, her co-conspirator in the ordeal, Cynthia Powell, was facing her own spectacular ruin. Internet sleuths had identified the demanding real estate agent from the background of the video. By Thursday morning, her luxury real estate brokerage, terrified of the catastrophic public relations nightmare, publicly terminated her contract. High-profile clients dropped her listings within hours. Cynthia was forced to deactivate all her social media accounts and flee the city to a secondary residence just to escape the relentless flood of global outrage and media scrutiny. 3 weeks later, the snow was falling heavily over the south side of Chicago. Malik Washington stood in the small, cramped living room of his grandmother's apartment. The viral fame had settled into a steady stream of local respect, and the GoFundMe for his youth orchestra had surpassed $500,000, securing instruments for hundreds of underprivileged kids. But right now, Malik only cared about the thick, cream-colored envelope in his hand, bearing the unmistakable crest of the Juilliard School. His grandmother, her hands worn from years of working double shifts to keep him fed and clothed, sat on the edge of the sofa. She held her breath, watching her grandson's trembling fingers tear the paper open. Malik pulled out the heavy cardstock. He scanned the first few lines. The air in the room seemed to stand still. Slowly, a massive, blinding smile broke across his face, and tears spilled over his eyelashes. "I got in, Grandma," Malik whispered, his voice cracking with a joy so profound it physically hurt. "Full ride. The presidential scholarship. It covers everything." His grandmother let out a sob of pure, unadulterated relief, pulling him into a fierce, crushing embrace. In that quiet living room, the journey was finally complete. A bitter gate agent had tried to permanently close a door on him, but by standing firm in his truth, Malik had inadvertently forced the universe to kick down 1,000 more. The story of Gate K-12 remains a legendary cautionary tale within the aviation industry, a stark reminder that power unchecked is a fragile illusion. Brenda Higgins's attempt to leverage her authority to crush a young man's dream resulted in her total professional ruin, proving that cruelty often architects its own destruction. Meanwhile, Kezia Verity's undercover intervention cemented his legacy as a leader who valued human dignity over corporate convenience. As for Malik Washington, he didn't just survive the attempt to silence his music, he used the experience to amplify it. Today, his 1735 Guarneri echoes through the grandest concert halls in the world, a testament to the fact that when integrity meets talent, no gatekeeper in the world can stop the flight. Justice, like a perfectly tuned violin, sometimes takes time to resonate. But when it finally strikes the right chord, the sound is truly unstoppable.